If you haven't already, be turning to the book of Matthew, Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6, and we'll be looking there at verses 1 through 4. But as we kind of work our way into this text, before we go back to it, I want us to kind of get our minds going in the right direction and really start kind of thinking about one of the major principles that is found within this text. Now, you have probably heard it said, if you want to make the world a better place, right? And then there's typically some sort of phrase that follows that, and I can think of two that are often very much the ones that come to my mind when I think about how it is that we're going to go about making this world a better place. Well, one of those, you might think, okay, well, if we want to make the world a better place, I need to focus on being the best person that I can be. Right? Whatever my role is in life, I need to make sure that I am being the best husband, that I am being the best spouse, that I am being the best father, and most certainly the best Christian that I can absolutely be. And in doing so, of course, even as we studied the fruits of the Spirit this morning, those will be seen in my life, and through my influence, I will have an impact on those people who are around me, therefore helping to make this world a better place. Now, you might have also heard it said this way, if you want to make the world a better place, it is done through one random act of kindness at a time. Now, I'm not real sure where the source or who it was that said that first. I think I've actually heard that in a movie, but nonetheless, we can appreciate the sentiment behind that thought. When you really start thinking about it, that we would be actively looking for an opportunity to do good to somebody else, hoping to do one random act of kindness, one after another. I think we can see the value in adopting that kind of mindset when I'm actively seeking opportunity to help other people. That sounds very Christ-like, doesn't it? It sounds just like someone who is trying to seek to please God, who is looking around at this world around them and seeking opportunities to extend the love of God even to other people. Now, something we need to keep in mind is if our motives are impure, if my motives are selfish, self-centered, then our good deed done has become questionable in the sight of God. You see, because though we may want to be doing good, if my motive is not pure, I'm doing good for all the wrong reasons. And I really think if we think about what Jesus is saying here and think about even what Jesus and much of what He teaches on the Sermon on the Mount, or even much of what He teaches throughout all of His ministry, something that He is exposing on a regular basis is hypocritical behaviors. And He often points to the Pharisees and He points to the scribes. Well, listen, we understand even looking from someone, if it was a worldly minded individual, they look at this idea of being labeled as a hypocrite and they're not seeing that in any kind of favorable light. It leaves a pretty bad taste in your mouth. We as Christians, we understand, look, the last term that I want to be describing of me is hypocritical. We need to make sure that the things that we are doing are centered upon a good and pure intent. That's something that Jesus is trying to draw out in this text. Now, thinking about all of that, and considering why it is that we do the good deeds that we do and making sure that our motive is pure, there's also something else that we need to discuss before we go into this text. Looking there at Matthew chapter 6 and verse 1, there's a term there I want us to understand. The term is charitable deeds. And Jesus is saying, make sure that you do not do your charitable deeds before men to be seen by men. Okay, well, what exactly does He mean by charitable deeds? A lot of the times when people come to this text, they'll immediately go to the idea of some sort of giving of alms or something of that nature, and it very much implies that kind of thought. But if you look to this word and actually seek out the root of this word in the original language, it goes to a word much like this, even seen in Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 4, that our God is rich in mercy. That's the word. That's what's at the root of the word that we make up charitable deeds. So basically it is any opportunity that I have where I have compassion and I see someone who's in need and I am moved to show mercy to that person. And now I'm willing to be a helping hand for that person. So it doesn't necessarily mean only in this idea of giving of financial means or something of that nature, but also being able to help someone who is in need, okay? That's the bigger picture that we're looking at in what Jesus is explaining here. All right. And even the very reason why some translations would render it this, beware of practicing your righteous deeds before men to be seen by them. Any good deed done make sure we're not doing it to be seen by men. All right, let's read again the text, and then we'll work into our lesson. Matthew chapter 6, verse 1. Take heed that you do not do your charitable deeds before men to be seen by them. Otherwise, you have no reward from your Father in heaven. Therefore, when you do a charitable deed, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory from men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. But when you do a charitable deed, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, that your charitable deed may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will himself reward you openly. There's three things I would like us to consider as we work through this text, and the first one is this. We need to be a people who are busy about doing good. You see, it's real easy to come into this verse and look there at verse 1 and immediately jump to the negative side of this and look at what it is that Jesus is saying, make sure that you're not doing. And it's very easy actually to come into this text and completely overlook the first implied expectation. Jesus, his expectation is that we are going to be a people who are busy about doing good things. You see, Jesus did not have to say this. He did not have to say, okay, well, first, let me explain it this way. I want you to understand that people who are going to follow me are going to be a busy people. They're going to be seeking opportunity to do good. And then turn and say, now, when you have those opportunities to do good, make sure you don't do it before men to be seen by them. No, he specifically just says, when you do your good deeds, the expectation, we will be a people who are busy doing good deeds. So we need to live up to the expectation that Jesus has for us. You know, Paul said it this way when speaking to Titus and writing to Titus, and of course by inspiration. Paul, speaking of Jesus the Christ, he says this, who gave his life for us, Titus chapter 2 and verse 14, who gave his life for us, that he might redeem us from every lawless deed and purify for himself his own special people, and watch this, zealous for good works. You see, not just busy doing good, but actively seeking opportunity to do good works. That was his desire. And he says, even in our text, when you're doing these good works, right, we're going to be people who are busy. Now, we just sang the song, I want to be a worker for the Lord. And even within that chorus, thinking about that song, it says, I will work, I will pray, I will labor every day in the vineyard of the Lord. We know that song and we sing that song. Do we sing it with sincerity? We know verses like 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 58, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in what? Always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that we are a people who are going to be busy working and laboring, seeking opportunity to extend God's mercy to other people in this world. We need to be a people who are busy. Yet, if we're not careful, when opportunity arises and we see someone who is in need, it may very well be the case that we're very fast to respond very slow. You get me? Very fast to respond very slow and step back and say, well, maybe if I wait this one out just a little bit, somebody else will come in and take care of this problem, and I don't actually have to deal with this, right? We need to be the ones that are actively hopping on the opportunity to help someone out. Jesus says, be busy. It might be the case that we even have this mindset. We see the opportunity arise, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, I've already clocked out for the day. As if our helping other people is based upon some hourly schedule. It's been my experience, and this is just my experience alone, so it's probably only worth about 2 cents. But when it comes time to helping other people, it doesn't often present itself at the most opportune time. Typically, it's at probably the worst time for you to actually be able to help somebody, but we seek that opportunity and we jump on that opportunity and we take advantage of that opportunity to help someone. Jesus is saying, I need you to be a people who are busy. Well, let's put this into a greater context and look at this, how Jesus explains this, even in Matthew chapter 25. Matthew chapter 25. And this is, in a sense, kind of like this idea of a judgment scene. And Jesus is giving explanation, and it is kind of alluding to what his followers would do. Matthew chapter 25, verse 34, it says, then the king will say to those on his right hand, come, you blessed of my Father, Inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? And the king will answer and say to them, Assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me also. You see, he's painting this picture. He's providing this imagery for us to understand what this life as a Christian looks like and how we extend mercy to other people and take those opportunities to help others, our charitable deeds. You know, Jesus even explained it this way in John chapter 13 and verse 35, By this they will know you are my disciples, if you have love one for another. You see, it's kind of a challenge, because we do live very busy lives. Nonetheless, we have a responsibility to live up to the expectation that Christ has for us to be actively busy seeking our opportunity to do good. And maybe one of the best ways to see how it is that we are to do this in our own lives is by looking at the example of Christ. Look to the life that He lived. Read through the gospel accounts and see everything that Jesus Christ has done in His lifetime and in His ministry. Then go to the end of the book of John in chapter 21 and verse 25 and read this. And there are also many other things Jesus did, which if they were written one by one, I suppose even the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. This is how busy Jesus the Christ was in doing good deeds and fulfilling the will of God. So busy that it could not all be written. The world could not contain the books if it was all written down. You see, one could break a sweat reading the book of Mark, thinking about all the work that Jesus did. I'll tell you this, if you read it fast enough out loud, you'll probably lose your breath, right? Jesus was a very active, He was a very busy man. I should look to Him as my example and even recognize that He was this way even at a young age. Luke chapter 2 and verse 49, you knew I'd be about my Father's business. You know something I learned early on, and I credit this to even my dad and seeing how hard of a worker he was all of the time that I remember. I credit this even to my granddad and seeing how hard of a worker he's always been. I've always been around people who work extremely hard. And I grew to appreciate what some might call job site etiquette. You see, here's something that you're going to do when you're on the job site, especially as Christians, and we've talked about this lately. You're going to be busy. You're going to be active. You're going to be working hard. You're going to be one of the best workers that your boss has ever had. Now, when your supervisor comes in and he comes on the job, you want a surefire way to lose your job? When he comes in and he starts picking up a hammer, he starts toting lumber, go ahead and choose that time to sit back and take a break, right? If he's busy, we're going to be busy. We're going to be busy if he's not there. Jesus Christ was busy every single day of His life, constantly doing good for other people. Look to His example and learn from His example. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 10, therefore as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially those who are of the household of faith. The point is, our Lord and Savior was a busy man. He expects us to be busy about doing good just the same. Don't miss that first implied expectation that's found in Matthew chapter 6 and verse 1, to be busy. All right, secondly, do good for the right reasons. If you look there again at Matthew chapter 6 in verse 1, we notice this, take heed that you do not do your charitable deeds before men. And now here's where the real point is and what he's driving to. What is your intent? He's saying to be seen by them. So make sure that you're doing good, but doing good for the right reason. Now, he's not at all saying you can't do good before men. We've already seen in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 16, to let your light so shine before men that they might see your good works. They're going to see these things, but in doing so, it's going to bring glory to God. That's what it should be doing. Where he says, make sure when you do these, you're not trying to turn that glory back to yourself, but rather you continue to make sure that you're doing it for the glory of God. So if I'm going to do that, one of the main things I need to do is question my motives when it comes to my doing good for other people. What motivates your good deeds? Now, this is one of those areas where we have to be willing, just like many others, to be very honest with ourselves, to really consider our own hearts, to think about our own actions, and really be willing to make proper change if necessary. Because sadly, even among brethren, there are times where maybe we're more apt to help someone if somebody else is watching. If we're honest with ourselves, we've maybe found ourselves in that scenario. You know, in Acts chapter 5, and we probably know this situation with Ananias and Sapphira. Acts chapter 5, verses 1 through 3, kind of give us ultimately what takes place with Ananias and Sapphira and what their reward is. But what had happened was they had seen another man. They had seen Barnabas give of all of his money that he had received from a land that he had sold. He takes all the proceeds, all the funds, and then he turns and he gives them to the apostles. He gives it to them, lays it at their feet, and the apostles then can take and distribute that money to everyone who has need. So everybody has everything that they need. And Ananias and Sapphira are kind of sitting back, and I suppose they see this take place, and they see possibly the praise that this man is receiving, and all of a sudden they conjure up this idea in their own minds, well, we could do something very similar. We can do a good deed, and then when we take the funds, we'll just lie about how much was actually received. You see, now it's a good deed with impure motives, and all of a sudden it's fixing to be very displeasing unto God. And they're even questioned, is this all that you received? They could have easily said, okay, we received this much, we need to keep this, and here's what we're given, and that would have been fine. But their motives were impure, and they wanted the praise that this other man had received. And what's really striking to me, when you look in that text there in Acts chapter 5, verses 1 through 3, there's a statement in there where Peter says, why has Satan filled your hearts? You could say it this way. Why have you fallen under the control of the adversary? You know, we might jokingly, when we mess up, and of course we recognize our fault, and then we want to do better, and we apologize, and we ask forgiveness, and then we may turn jokingly, say to somebody, well, Satan made me do it. Right? We understand it wasn't necessarily Satan that made us do it. We chose to do that wrong. The temptation was there. We made that choice. But thinking of it even in that light, imagine if it were that Satan was there whispering in his ear. Whispering in the ear of Ananias, wouldn't it be wonderful if your name was on every lip as Barnabas is? You see, there's that temptation. There's that want to receive praise from men. If Ananias would have simply responded, not interested, things would have been a whole lot different. You see, Satan would have fled from him. James chapter 4 and verse 7. Therefore submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Yet instead it seems as if in this thought process, Ananias says, tell me more. He was enticed and fell into temptation. Therefore, Satan swooped in and took a foothold on his heart. So if I'm going to question my own motives and think about my own heart, it definitely comes with the idea that I need to be ready to guard my heart. Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 23. Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring the issues of life. Okay, well, how can I go about effectively questioning my own motives so that I can protect and guard my own hearts? I have 4 simple questions here. We'll call it the motive meter, to give it a fancy title, right? The motive meter. Here's the 4 questions, and we have to be honest with ourselves about these. Am I more likely to help others if someone is around to see it? Does a crowd of people being around someone who is in need increase my desire to want to help that person? Or would I want to help them just the same even if nobody was there? How about this? Does a lack of recognition for good deeds done in the past discourage me at the next opportunity to do good? Do I use that and think about that? Well, last time I did good for somebody, I didn't get anything out of that. What praise did I get? This actually took time out of my day and all these things, and nobody saw it, nobody recognized me. Now am I less motivated to help the next person? Okay, well, let's flip that. Here's another question. Does recognition from previous deeds done make me more apt to do good deeds in the future? You see, looking at on the flip side, well, the last time that I helped this person, man, I got all kind of praise. Now, most definitely, I'm going to help that person. I enjoyed that praise. Shouldn't be our way of thinking. If we're honest with ourselves, those kind of thoughts just might enter into our minds just as it did with Ananias and Sapphira. How about this one? And this one is probably the one that will stomp our toes the most, if we're being honest with ourselves. After doing a good deed, is it the topic of your every conversation the rest of the day? Where I help someone out who is in need, who is struggling, whatever the case may be. Maybe they're stranded on the side of the road and I give them a ride into town and help them to get their vehicle fixed. Maybe it's the case that someone needs financial help and I help them. Whatever the case may be. Am I prone to, from that point forward, in that day, every conversation that I have say, oh, you won't believe what I did for so-and-so? If they wouldn't have had me show up, man, they sure would have been in trouble. Do we have that kind of thinking? Do we voice those kinds of things, even if not out loud, in our own minds? We need to be real careful in thinking about the motives, the intent, and why we help other people. Jesus says, from within, out of the heart of men proceed evil thoughts. Right in the middle of this list of these different sins that follow is pride. Mark chapter 7 and verse 21. You see, consider this. If we're being honest with ourselves and we answered yes to any four of those questions, it's evidence that Satan has took a foothold in our hearts just the same. We see it as a very serious offense when we look at Ananias and Sapphira. Do we look at it as the same great offense when it comes to our own lives and our own hearts? We need to make sure that we are doing good for the right reasons, checking our motives and guarding our hearts. We also need to do good discreetly. Back in Matthew chapter 6, looking there at verses 2 through 4. Matthew chapter 6, verse 2, therefore, when you do a charitable deed, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets. Make sure that we're doing our good deeds discreetly. That will definitely help with the heart and the motive, the intent, right? If we're being sure to try and do these good deeds discreetly as we possibly can. And some have gone to great lengths to say, okay, well, he was speaking about some sort of physical horn, and it's almost as if people would get ready to do a good deed, and it's like, do, and they get ready to do their good deed, right? Like, see me, watch me, know what I'm doing. I don't know if it's to that extent. More so, I think it's something along the lines of a term we use very often today, not to toot my own horn. Right? And oftentimes when we say that, if we're going to phrase something like that, that's going to be what's stated before we go into our discussion. We're tooting our own horn. We're doing exactly that. What Jesus is saying, don't let that be your mindset. Don't do that. Don't sound the trumpet. Don't seek self-glorification. We will never glorify God as we should until we can eliminate the desire for self-glory in our lives. And this is something that I would venture to say. I would venture to say it even to this extent, that this is a greater problem today than it ever has been in the past, in the history of man. I would venture to say that. Here's why. Social media. You know how many people are out there trying to do good deeds, and it starts out something like this. They want to do good for other people, and they find a way then to record these things and share these things on social media. And the next thing you know, they have this following. They have all these likes and all these people who love their content. They have all these viewers, and then they start sending funds to them to support this work. Well, then this work becomes more about the money than it is actually about helping people, and then it's about the fame, and all of a sudden it's completely lost the original intent. And whatever the original intent was, it is completely lost in the hype. It is a very challenging thing to do our good deeds discreetly in the world that we live in today. Because everything's about making yourself known, putting yourself out there, and receiving all the likes that you can on social media. You see, it kind of loses that original intent when it comes to that. Consider whose actions Jesus was countering throughout much of the Sermon on the Mount and throughout all of his ministry. Remember, we kind of spoke of this, the Pharisees, the scribes. Well, when you think about that hypocritical nature, he condemned their hypocritical giving, Matthew chapter 6 and verse 2. He condemned their hypocritical prayers, Matthew chapter 6 and verse 5. He condemned their hypocritical fasting, Matthew chapter 6 and verse 16. He condemned their hypocritical teaching and living in Matthew chapter 23 and verse 3. It was always a facade. It was always only surface level deep in effort to get somebody to look at them and praise them. It is so easy to do that today. So easy to do that even in our own lives. Now here's what Jesus says about that kind of mindset. Assuredly I say to you, Matthew chapter 6 and verse 2, assuredly I say to you, they have their reward. Now there's been a lot of thought to go into this. Okay, well what kind of reward are we talking here? How serious is this warning that is found in this verse? Some might even venture so far to say, okay, this is a Hammond type reward. Remember Hammond and what he did in his pride? He was so furious over this one Jew because he wouldn't, give him glory? Because he wouldn't pay him homage. He was so furious over this one Jew that he decided to annihilate an entire nation. And he prepares this gallows and he has it set where everybody can see. So when he has his day, they will see this man Mordecai hanging on the gallows. And sure enough, Haman is hung on his own gallows. I don't know. I don't think that's to the extent that Jesus is stating the reward that's going to be received. I think more so what he's saying here is if that's the praise you want, if that's the reward you seek, well, you can get it. But you're not going to receive it from God. Either way you like to look at it. Hopefully at the end of the day, our concern is about bringing glory to God and then ultimately receiving glory from God. He says you will receive your reward. You know, speaking of doing things discreetly, you remember what Mordecai did within all of that? Mordecai actually had overheard a conversation at the gates about these men that were conspiring to kill the king, King Ahasuerus. And he got word to Esther. Esther got word to the king. The king's life was spared. These men were not able to assassinate him. And nothing was done for Mordecai right off the bat. Nothing. He did his good deed discreetly. Now, as time played out, Haman got what he deserved, right? The irony is deep in the book of Esther. And with time, Mordecai received the position of authority that Haman always desired. Paraded around in the streets on the king's horse. You might even think about Joseph, everything that Joseph endured, yet he did his good deeds discreetly and well blessed because of it. Here's the thing, and we'll close with this kind of thought. If we're going to do good discreetly, we need to make sure that, of course, we are not seeking self-glorification. We need to be more concerned about bringing glory to God, to glorifying God. And that really ties back to a verse that we've already discussed in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 16, that yes, we are letting our light so shine, not being in the spotlight, we are letting our light so shine, right, that people see our good works and they glorify our Father which is in heaven. It's not about being in the limelight. It's not about being in the center of the spotlight, but rather reflecting the light of Christ in our lives so that He receives the glory. And you could easily tie that also to another verse we've already mentioned, Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 4, that our God is rich in mercy. It should be enough for me to think about what my God has done for me when I am completely undeserving. It should be enough for me to think about what Jesus Christ endured for me when I am completely undeserving and the mercy that was extended to me. It should motivate me to help other people without any need for recognition or praise from man, but simply to glorify God and to extend the same love that has been extended to me. He says it this way at the latter part of this section, be so discreet about this that your left hand doesn't even know what your right hand's doing. I don't know exactly how you could pull that off, but I understand what he's getting at. It should be something that you're striving so hard to do in secret that your left hand wouldn't even recognize what your right is doing. Is that our mindset? Is that the way we think about opportunities to do good to other people? Because those 4 simple questions we ask, they can hit real hard if we're being honest with ourselves. What is our intent? What is our motive in doing good for other people? Here's a warning, and here's maybe a thought as we close. Fight the pedestal. Don't put yourself up on a pedestal, right? That's that pride, that's that lofty thinking. Fight the pedestal and don't allow other people to put you up there either, and fight the limelight. We don't need to be in the spotlight. We are to shine the light of Christ in the lives that we live. Make sure that we are not doing good for all the wrong reasons. Jesus is very clear in his teaching on the Sermon on the Mount, on all of his ministry, that there is a certain way of living that is full of hypocrisy. It is very hypocritical. And his followers are not to live that kind of life, but be more concerned about glorifying God each and every day and striving for those opportunities to help other people. Maybe it's the case that you, even in your own thoughts, get caught up in the praise of men. Maybe it is the case that when you go to help someone else, it's almost like second nature to you to immediately try and go and tell other people about these things. Jesus would warn against it. Whatever the case may be, even if it's a different matter, where is your heart at? What's your intent each and every day? What are you seeking? What are you striving for? Matthew chapter 6, verse 33, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all these things will be added unto you. Or are you truly striving to follow after Christ on his terms? Maybe it's the case that this is not a matter that bothers your heart. Maybe it's not something that you struggle with, but it could be that you are struggling with sin today. It could be that you need prayers from the congregation, that you need help to overcome something in your life, and we're here to help you with that very matter. It may be the case that you've not yet even put on Christ in baptism, and you would like to know more about what it means to be a disciple of Christ. We would love to study with you about that. Whatever needs you might have, we would love to discuss it with you and help you in any way possible. Make sure as we go out into the week that we are doing good for all the right reasons and not the wrong. If you have any need, please let it be known as together we stand and as we sing.